intro music. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel. And this is Going Down the Sky and Telescope series. And I'm very happy to have Kelly Beatty with us today. Kelly Beatty. Hi there, Kelly.
Hey, Frank, how you doing?
I'm doing well today. Where are you located at?
Well, I'm in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston, maybe about 25 miles to the northwest on the way to New Hampshire. It's funny because I'm originally from California, and all these New England states are so tiny compared to what I'm used to in California. So like I'm 20 minutes from New Hampshire and a half an hour from Vermont, and there you go.
So how long have you been on the East Coast?
Well, I actually moved out here in 1974 to join the staff of Sky and Telescope, and I have been here ever since.
Very cool. Very cool. When did Sky and Telescope start, by the way? So you must have been pretty early.
It was 1941. And in fact, this is our 80th anniversary year of continuous publication. Awesome. And, unlike magazines like Field and Stream, Guns and Ammo, which are just made up, there really were two predecessors, The Sky and The Telescope.
There you go.
That were small-scale publications during the late 1930s that came together under one ownership in 1941 and became a single publication.
Cool. So that's quite a history. Boy, we could ask all kinds of questions there. So what do you currently do for Sky and Telescope? Let's start current epoch.
Peter Tyson, the editor, would tell you that I make his life miserable. I retired from full-time work in about 3 years ago in 2018. And so that was after, 45-ish years of being on the staff. I'm still around. I'm not letting go. I'm working 1 day a week, sort of on a contract basis to handle special projects. I do a little writing every now and then. My specialty is planetary science, space exploration, and pounding the beat for 45 years. I have like a lot of contacts in the planetary science community, and so it often comes in handy for the staff to have me tackle a story, say on the Perseverance landing, or I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, the Chinese returned the first samples of the moon to come back to Earth since the 1970s. Right. And so I'm going to be doing a story on the analysis of those samples because my background is in geology.
Very good. Very good. And that is a really awesome set of globes behind you there. I just have to comment on that.
Well, that's one of the things that I'm still involved with. Over the course of the last 30 years or so, NASA has done a pretty good job of mapping all of the solid bodies in our solar system. And so they create these databases, and we work with a company called Replogle in the Chicago area to produce actually two sets of globes. Those behind me that you see are 12 inches across. And then there's another smaller series that are 6 inches across.
Okay.
And these have been incredibly popular, and it takes some effort to take a flat map and turn it into a three-dimensional globe, and that's where I come in. That and the geology has been really helpful there.
Very cool. Very cool. So, okay, so that's current. So let's go back to maybe the beginning, 1976 or so, thereabouts. So how did you get into science writing?
Yeah, that was not my intent, believe me. I wanted to be an astronomer, truth to tell. I grew up in Central California in a little town called Madera.
Yes.
Which is in the geographic center of the state. Had beautiful dark skies, was on a farm for a lot of that. That was sort of pre-light pollution in a heavy-handed kind of way. And I would go out at night, look up at the sky, and wham, the stars and the Milky Way would just hit me. And boy, in a situation like that, you think big thoughts and you wonder, why am I here? How did it all happen? Why are there stars? And so I had a scientific bent. I was a sort of child of the space age, fascinated by the Apollo moon landings and the early mariners to Venus and Mars. And so I set my sights on becoming an astronomer, and I got fortunately accepted at Caltech, California Institute of Technology. So it's really kind of a funny story. I was looking at UC Berkeley and places like that, and my my grandparents lived in San Diego, so we used to drive by Palomar all the time, and we made a visit or two, and I was in awe of that, Mount Palomar. And I'm with my dad driving one day, and we were talking about college, and he said, "Well, isn't Caltech the owner of Palomar?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, why don't you apply to Caltech?" No one from my little town had it, like hardly anyone had ever applied, let alone got accepted to Caltech, but I did. And what I found out was, boy, it's challenging to be a real live and kicking PhD astronomer. And so I tell people it's like having a physics degree with solar interiors thrown in, you know. And so I migrated to planetary science. Something that I could tackle. My degree was actually in geology. And by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I didn't really see myself as research scientist material. I was, honest enough with myself about that. I understood the science, I just couldn't master it. And so I started doing things that today we call outreach, but that word really hadn't been invented in the 1970s, if you think about it. And so I gave tours of the campus, and I wrote little articles and things like that. And we had a kind of a predecessor of monster.com called the placement office at Caltech that helped graduates find jobs.
Yes.
And one day they came across an advertisement for an editor, an entry-level editor at Sky and Telescope. They forwarded that to me because they knew that was kind of where I was going. Flew out to Massachusetts, got the job, and that was in July of '74, and I never looked back.
Wow, that is an awesome trajectory.
Now I have to say, I didn't really have any writing experience, to your question, right? But I had something that the Sky and Tel staff valued. They were largely a sort of East Coast establishment group at that time, and I had worked at JPL a little bit as part of my Caltech stint. And so having someone on staff with connections to JPL in the middle of the Mariners, and it was very valuable to them. So that probably sealed the deal for me.
Yep. Wow. Very good. Very good. So 74, 80s. Yeah. Wow.
And in fact, when I moved out in '74, that was right in the middle of the Mariner 10 mission, which, for those who are too young to remember, went by Venus on the way to Mercury and did 3 flybys of Mercury in rather quick succession. And the head of the imaging team was Dr. Bruce Murray, who had been my sort of advisor, mentor at Caltech. And so I was following him to a lot of where I really got the idea to go into science writing. I would follow Bruce to press conferences at JPL, where the press corps consisted of a bunch of people who had no background in science whatsoever. This is before the advent of science magazines like Discover and Omni, right? That the real heyday of science writing. And I'm kind of waiting in the wings there, and these reporters would ask these patently stupid questions, and I said, hell, I can do that. And so that's what put the idea in my head that I could be a science journalist. And so I went out, got the job at Sky and Telescope, and meanwhile the Mariner 10 mission was still going on. And one of my first assignments, this would never happen today, at Bruce's invitation, the second flyby of Mercury had happened and had just happened. And I flew out to JPL and sat down with Bruce, and in front of us on this huge table are 8x10 glossy black and whites of every image that Mariner 10 took. And Bruce basically said, which ones do you like? And so we went through, and I picked out like a dozen pictures that would become the backbone of a feature article in Sky and Telescope. We made note of the numbers, and magically those dozen pictures became press released images just about the time that my article appeared in Sky and Telescope. That would never happen today.
Fortuitous.
But it helped establish, Sky and Telescope as always has been, right, a sort of go-to publication for what's going on in the world of astronomy.
Yeah. Oh, very nice. Very nice. Very cool. So do you have any other current projects going on at the moment?
So what I'm doing mostly these days, I need to take you back in time, Frank.
Yes, please.
In 1970s and 80s, guess what? Eclipses happened. I
Yes.
know it'll be a shock, but they did happen. And sometimes they happen in weird parts of the world. And so our staff at that time was led by Leif Robinson, the editor. Charlie Federer, who started the magazine, had retired about the time I showed up. In fact, I was the founder. And Leif was running the magazine, and he and other members of the staff wanted to go see eclipses, wanted to go see solar organize a small group to go to, the Caribbean or Florida or Washington State or wherever there happened to be an eclipse. What we found was that a lot of other people wanted to go with us. So that eclipse touring really got started.
Okay.
And it's gotten to the point now that Sky and Telescope under the umbrella of the AAS, we see astronomically themed tours as a really wonderful part we do. And so my job, what's left of my job, is to help Tyson coordinate these tours. We're now doing 3 or 4 a year. They don't always be eclipses. We take a group to Iceland every fall to see auroras.
Oh, nice.
We have an astronomically themed tour of Italy for next summer. We do stargazing tours to the Southern Hemisphere, Australia and Chile and Botswana. So I help with that. And it's very satisfying once they, come off successfully. And so I help Peter and the staff of Sky and Telescope in that regard.
Very nice. So on a non-US based solar eclipse, roughly how many people go on these tours? Are these tours of 10? Are these tours of 1,000? Or
well, there is a lot of pent-up demand. It kind of depends. A funny thing about solar eclipses is there is a group of people, and I would say they maybe number in the hundreds, who go to every conceivable solar eclipse, no matter where, no matter how remote. They've got to be there. It's like notches on a belt, right? They have to conquer solar eclipses. There are plenty of people in and out of the astronomical community who've seen 30 total solar eclipses in their lifetimes.
Wow.
And so that takes a lot of effort. And so sometimes there are places where it's relatively easy to get to. 2017 was a perfect case in point. The track of that solar eclipse crossed the United States. Sky and Telescope had 2 big tours. One was in Nashville, which I ran. The other was in Glendo, the tiny town of Glendo, Wyoming, population 50.
Yes.
That attracted tens of thousands of people on eclipse day, including 200 people from Sky and Telescope that Peter Tyson was with. So there was a case that was sort of maximal, right? We had 2 groups of 200 people each.
Wow.
Now we have solar eclipses that are in more unusual places in the world. And the funny thing is, it's not so much that people have to see that solar eclipse, but they've always wanted to see Kenya, or they've always wanted to go to Patagonia, and there's an eclipse going through, and that is a convenient a coincidence, a hook for going. And so, for example, the next total solar eclipse is going to be in December. It actually doesn't really cross much land at all. It arcs across Antarctica, and there are groups that will take you to Antarctica. We're not one of them. And then it crosses the Southern Ocean. And so we have 2 groups lined up, each of which will probably have about 40 to 50 people each.
Wow. Okay.
One will be aboard a ship that is what's called an expedition ship. It leaves from the southern end of South America, Punta Arenas.
Yes.
And we'll go down and we'll do landings on the Antarctic Peninsula, and make Penguin friends, and then we'll go up to the South Orkney Islands, along with a bunch of other ships too. And we hope to see the eclipse from the ocean on December 4th. Then the other group we have will also go to Chile and South America, but what they will do instead is take a tour of Patagonia,
Okay.
and then they'll get aboard a plane, an Airbus 321, and they'll fly off into the night and catch the eclipse from altitude from 38,000 feet just after dawn. And they're guaranteed of seeing the
I was
eclipse
going to say
because
the weather is less of an issue at
that's
38,000.
right. That's right. So to your question, it varies. These tours vary from 30 people to a few hundred people.
So I'm curious, when an airplane flies, and presumably it's getting on center line, how long does totality last if it's a total solar eclipse?
Right. If you do it right, it can extend the duration of totality for 30 seconds or so.
Really?
In that part of the
It's
track,
really moving. It's really moving, right?
yeah, the moon shadow is supersonic, a mile a second or more, and so if you're going in the same direction as the shadow is traveling, you can extend it for some period of time.
Yeah.
It's not like you suddenly can have an indefinite period of time. There are some celebrated cases where astronomers used a Concorde jet back in the 70s to chase a solar eclipse, and I don't know, they got like, I don't know, upward of an hour because they were mostly able to keep up with it.
Yeah, that's wow. So if someone is interested in taking one of these tours, like I might be interested in Aurora, that's still on my bucket list of things to see in life. How does one get on one of these?
You go to the Sky and Telescope website, which is skyandtelescope.org./tours.
Okay.
And there you'll see arrayed all of the tours that we have upcoming, including the ones the very next tour we have coming is in June.
Okay.
Little known fact, there's going to be an annular eclipse that will just miss the northern United States. It'll start in southern Canada and head off to Greenland and Siberia. And it's kind of formidable to get into the path of that annular eclipse. This is a ring eclipse, right? The sun is not completely covered because the moon is too far away to completely cover it. And so we're chartering a plane. We've chartered a Delta Airbus. We'll fly out of Minneapolis, and we'll fly. We leave at 3:15 in the morning, and we'll intercept the annular eclipse over southern Canada.
Okay.
And so what, there have to be certain circumstances though that allow for a plane. For one thing, the sun has to be near the horizon. If it's overhead, there's no way to like look out the plane windows to see it.
Yeah,
So if it's down near the horizon within like 15 or 20 degrees, you're good. And then the plane flies in such a way so the sun is directly out the window. It doesn't do any turning around. And so consequently, we don't take very many people on these planes, only like 2 per row. 50 is a lot of people on one of these eclipse flights.
Yeah.
And that's coming up on June 10th.
Okay.
And we still have space on that plane. So feel free to sign up and join me on that. That should be a lot of fun, that one.
How many solar eclipses have you seen?
I'm up to 13 totals and 6 annulars.
Okay.
And honestly, the tally would be higher. I'd be in that sort of 25 category, except that when I was a junior staffer on Sky and Telescope, I did not get the draw to go see a total solar eclipse.
Yeah.
It was my bosses. It was, the Dennis DeChicos and the higher ups. They got to go on the cruises, and I stayed home and made sure the magazine got put out.
Right. So of the ones you've seen, what is your most memorable?
Well, 2 come to mind.
Okay.
Your viewers might know that solar eclipses have a pattern that repeats about every 18 years, a Saros cycle. And so there's one coming up in December 2021. The previous one was in November of 2003.
Okay.
And that was our first scary heavy duty involvement tour because we chartered an Airbus 340, which at the time was the largest one made. It was a 15-hour long flight over Antarctica.
Oh, okay.
With 60 people aboard.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get permission from, in addition to paying $250,000 to fly the plane, we had a travel partner called Travel Quest who helped arrange this. I had to get permission from the Department of State, the National Science Foundation, which runs, all the Antarctic activities, and the Environmental Protection Agency.
Sure.
So for example, you're flying over Antarctica and something happens to the plane, you have to land the plane. This is a big plane. Turns out at that time, there were only 4 places in Antarctica where you could land an A340. There were no places in Antarctica where it could then take off. And so on this plane, in addition to all the other preparations, we had a team of, from the Chilean army, a team of polar survival experts. We had survival suits for everybody on board. We had a cardiologist who spoke 4 different languages. I mean, this was deep, and it was a fantastic eclipse. The pilot was so cool. His name was Hans Fuschlacher. I'll never forget. And we buzzed the South Pole at 1,500 feet twice.
Wow.
We have pictures of people standing out in the South Pole as we flew overhead. And we even managed to get a couple of pictures from the South Pole of people taking pictures of our plane overhead.
Very good.
So that was one. That flight came within 3, because we took off and landed at the same location, Punta Arenas. That almost set the Guinness record for the longest domestic air flight ever taken.
Wow.
It was won by another eclipse flight, a 747 on that same eclipse that took off from Sydney, Australia, and it beat us by 6 minutes. Its flight was 6 minutes longer than ours. So that's one. The other one was a disappointing one.
Huh.
I took a group of about 40 people to Kenya in 2006.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not 2006. I'm trying to remember the date. They all kind of blurred together. Might have been 2000. Well, anyway, it was a group, maybe 2008, when totality was only supposed to last 11 seconds.
Ooh, wow.
Only 11 seconds.
Yeah.
And to get to the path of totality, which was very thin, the moon shadow was very thin, which explained why it was so short. We had to fly from Nairobi on Cessnas to a national park along the shore of Lake Turkana. It was a dirt runway. It was 110 degrees. It was brutally hot. Our conditions were very primitive. And not only did we not get to see the eclipse because it was cloudy, but a sandstorm came roaring out of the mountains, and so ferocious that it knocked over all of our tripods and all of our tents and everything. It was miserable. And yet, people loved the trip because as part of that trip, we did some really terrific safaris and jeeps and got really up close and personal with all the wildlife that Africa is known for. And all in all, it was a huge success. We didn't see the eclipse, but the trip itself was great.
Cool. Some work, some don't.
Exactly. There are some of these diehard eclipse chasers who pride themselves on never having been clouded out. I am not one of those people, sadly. I've been clouded out 3 times.
Okay. My last one was the last one that was in the US. I was actually in Idaho for that one. It was, and the last one I had seen, I was a child. I was probably on the order of 12 or so. So it'd been a little while since I'd seen one at totality, and I was very close to centerline. And it was a lot more visceral than I had expected it would be. It really hit you. It's very cool.
Well, we have this saying in the eclipse biz. We have a couple of sayings. One is that if you ask someone if they've ever seen a total eclipse, and if they can't remember whether they have or not, they haven't.
I haven't seen it.
Right. There's just not something you forget.
No.
And the other saying we have, and this was especially true after the one in 2017, where tens of millions of Americans
Yeah.
got to see totality for the first, and I hope not the last time, is as soon as you've seen totality for the first time, the first four words out of your mouth are, when's the next one?
Next one. Yes, yes. I'm sure everybody immediately looked at the map and go, okay, when's the next one? It's going to be 2024.
And in fact, one of those globes behind me, the one on, I'm not sure which, you can see Antarctica. It's the Earth globe with the big white Antarctica there.
Uh-huh.
That's our most recent globe. That's a globe of the Earth on which we have plotted all of the total eclipse paths for the 21st century.
Very nice.
And so whenever there's a doubt where you want to be, I'll give you an example. And this is a sort of emblematic of how far in advance we're working. In August of 2026, there's going to be a total solar eclipse that crosses the Iberian Peninsula. Northern Spain comes close to clipping Portugal. It's a part of Spain that's totally beautiful. And so we're in the first stages of planning our trip, our itinerary for that eclipse. That's how far in advance we're working on these. That's 5.5 years from now.
Yeah.
But you have to do that because guess what? A lot of these places, if there's an eclipse coming and they're in the path, they might not be astronomers, but they know that there's going to be an eclipse and there's going to be people coming and there's money to be made. Right.
Business opportunity. Yep.
So you have to plan early and often.
All right. Okay, people, sign up for an eclipse with some professional watchers. It'll be cool. So let me shift gears a little bit. So this will be your chance to do sort of a synopsis, if you like, over your very long tenure there at Sky and Telescope and before. So how has amateur astronomy changed during your tenure at S&T?
There's in so many ways, Frank. It's hard to enumerate them all. I would have to say, when I first started, there was no internet, right?
Sure. Yes.
And so, if something was happening in astronomy, you turned to Sky and Telescope. We really had no competitors at that time either, and so you would get Sky and Telescope, and we hear story after story of now, aging baby boomer amateur astronomers who got, as a teenager, they started reading Sky and Telescope and they couldn't wait for it to show up in their mailbox, and they would pore over it cover to cover, and that's where they would find out that there's an eclipse coming or a comet had been discovered or whatever it happened to be. And of course, now the internet provides vast quantities of astronomical information, but Sky and Telescope remains relevant in part because we have a very active website where we provide a lot of that information. And it's also comforting to people to know that the information is solid and vetted, not extreme. A good case in point is right now there's a nova that has flared into view in Cassiopeia. Mm-hmm. It has gotten as bright as 7th or 8th magnitude, which is easily viewable in a dark sky location by even a small telescope. And we got right on it, and we had an authoritative article posted by Bob King, one of our great contributing editors, within hours of us finding out about it. And so we remain a lifeline of authoritative, dependable, true astronomical information. We know the difference between astronomy and astrology. There are no space lasers. And so
very good. Very good.
That said, we are at our heart a publication.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a challenging time for publication.
Indeed.
And so, Sky and Telescope itself had been a sort of family employee-owned publication for many, many years, bounced around to a couple of corporate owners and ended up, fortunately, with the AAS, a perfect match, synergistic in so many ways.
Yeah.
And so this has actually infused our readers with a renewed sense of, yes, sky and telescope matters. Yes, I want to support it. And so that's all good. The other thing that's really changed about amateur astronomy in the last 40 or 50 years is the breadth of equipment
Yes.
that is available to amateur astronomers. Back in the 70s, if you had a telescope that was 6 inches across, a 6-inch reflector, that was a big scope for those periods. And people who had like 10 and 12-inch reflectors, or maybe a 6-inch refractor, they would be achromats. They wouldn't be particularly good quality. You were like the ruler of your local astronomy club.
Yeah.
And so now, in part because so much of the optics is being made in China, and a lot of it is very good quality. There is a lot of unfortunate stuff, and I'll get to that in a sec, coming out of China, but there's a lot of first-class equipment and the electronics and the digital cameras, to the extent that amateur astronomers with well-equipped backyard observatories can do research grade observations.
Yes.
And the partnership of professional and amateur astronomers is stronger now than it's ever been. There are routinely annual conferences of professionals and amateurs getting together. The AAS now has an amateur astronomer category. If an asteroid coming near the Earth is going to be within view of the Goldstone radar tracking antenna, but the position is a little squirrely and they're not quite sure where to point, they put out the call, and amateur astronomers go out and do the astrometry that nails down the orbit. It's not so much any longer the lone wolf who's off discovering asteroids or comets on his or her own. That doesn't happen so much anymore, but the collaboration. Exoplanets is a good case in point. Amateurs can do photometry to nail down the periods of exoplanets. I'll give you a real good current event case in point. There's this asteroid called Apophis, which is about, 400 meters across, maybe a quarter of a mile across. And it is a threatening asteroid. It's going to come very close to the Earth in 2029. And there's still an outside chance that it could strike the Earth in 2068. So having its orbit pinned down is really important. And the problem with Apophis is we've discovered that asteroids don't just move, by gravitational motion around the sun. They have this effect called the Yarkovsky effect, which is kind of like a little radiation engine. They absorb sunlight and then they re-radiate it in a way that alters their orbit.
Yes.
And there's no good way to predict this, so you just have to keep really close tabs on them. Turns out that Apophis made a reasonably close pass to Earth at the beginning of this month. And astronomers have been watching it. But, even with a good telescope, there's still so much uncertainty as to where it is on the plane of the sky. Yes, the Goldstone radar was involved and it did get some recordings, but that's just line of sight distance and velocity. It doesn't give you the plane of sky position. A really good way to determine where it is on the sky is through an occultation. If Apophis were to pass in front of a star, you would be able to know very precisely where it is on the sky. Well, the problem is it's only 400 meters across. That's the width of the shadow that it casts on the Earth. And believe it or not, over the last month, there have been a series of occultations for which a team of professional and amateur astronomers has mobilized to set up high-speed video cameras along possible locations in the path, and have succeeded in capturing occultations of Apophis that have absolutely nailed down its orbit to a precision that would not have otherwise been possible.
Cool. Very nice. Very nice.
So that's the stature of amateur astronomers
gone up
these days is sky high.
Yep.
And yet that's sort of the cream of the crop, right? There exists a comet Neowise last fall, earlier in 2020, attracted a lot of attention, but there was so much bad information, it was not easy to find. unless you had a really dark sky. And so what would happen is people would rush out and they would buy a telescope because they heard Comet Neowise is coming, but they know nothing about telescopes. And the places that sell telescopes, pick the big box store that you want to malign, right? Where you might buy these kinds of things.
Right.
Nobody there knows anything about telescopes. They all come in cardboard boxes that you can't really see what's inside, but it's got pretty pictures on the outside, so it must be good.
Must be good.
For $100. I
Of
literally bought a telescope in a CVS for $25. That included the tripod. This is sort of the bad side of the Chinese telescope invasion, because these telescopes are all being made in China. They come over by the pallet load, and there are plenty of companies, not all of them reputable, that are eager to sell you this $100 telescope. And this got started back in the 1980s with Comet Halley, you might recall.
Oh, yeah.
Came through in the mid 80s.
Yep.
And a number of companies started selling really inexpensive telescopes to capitalize on the interest in Comet Halley for $100, and that's not a very good telescope. And so what would happen is a family, maybe you've got a precocious 10-year-old who is really keen on astronomy. And so you, the parents, don't know anything about telescopes, but you know that your son or daughter wants one. So you go down to, Walmart, or there was the Nature Company back then, and you buy a telescope and you keep your fingers crossed that it'll work. And you get it home and it's largely junk. It's very wobbly. It's not very high quality. Okay. And so you look at the moon, you see the moon, you see a couple of planets, and then what? Of course, light pollution plays into this. And often it would not perform to your expectations or might even break. And here's the key. Rather than knowing enough to blame the poor quality of the telescope, these poor parents figured it must be them. They must just not be able to handle it. And so two very bad things happened. First, that telescope got shoved in the closet and never got used again.
Right.
The second thing is, that's the last telescope they'll ever buy.
Correct.
Right. Rather than going through the progression that most amateur astronomers do, which is you buy a simple telescope, then you buy a better one, then you buy a better one. That's it. Game over. And that's sad, because there are untold tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people over the course of my time at Sky and Telescope, not only in the US, but worldwide, who had a flicker of interest in astronomy that was snuffed out because they got some bad equipment.
I teach fairly large introductory astronomy courses, and one of the things I have them do is go out and look at the night sky. And the number of stories that people will put on discussion forums about exactly what you just talked about, of a telescope long ago bought and didn't really work. I get that all the time. There's a lot of stories like that. And so to a lot of those people, at least in the courses that I'm teaching, it's a chance to rekindle that flame. And so now we do talk a little bit about, if you're going to get a new telescope, this is kind of the things you should look for. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars to get a reasonable quality one, but to a lot of those people, it's a very valuable experience to be able to go back to something that they maybe looked at in childhood and pick it up again. So yeah, and I appreciate the story you're telling. It's quite true.
It's very poignant, almost painful to me, because I am so enthusiastic about getting people to look up into the night sky.
Yes.
By the way, I do a monthly podcast. One of the things I still do for Sky and Telescope, I do a monthly audio podcast that you can download from our website, which requires nothing more than you taking me outside with you. And over 10 minutes, 12 minutes, I walk you around the evening sky, and no experience is required. And I tell, stories about the mythology, or that star cluster, is maybe the same as where the sun was born 4.5 billion years ago, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so I encourage people, even if they don't have equipment, to go out and find a way to just appreciate the night sky. And I would mention that coming up in the second week of April is International Dark Sky Week. this is a chance to go in a sort of, I don't know, uh, affirmed environment to go out and use the resources that Sky and Telescope and lots of other people provide to take a look at the night sky, uh, and try to think those big thoughts, those big universe thoughts that sort of got me going, especially during this sort of pandemic
It's a driver.
driven isolation that we have. A lot of parents are looking for crazy things to do with their kids, and believe it or not, just being out in your backyard or going down. Maybe you don't have a backyard, maybe you live in an apartment, then find a little league park or a soccer field or something like that, just a nice place where you're away from the street lights, and just take it in. It is very, very satisfying.
So I'll make three points on that, at least if I remember all three. The other thing that has changed that I do find drives, so number one, I will put a link in the video, in the description below the video on your podcast. So we'll get some people going there. The other one that I have found that has really sort of re-engaged people with the night sky are these augmented reality apps that you get on your mobile phone, right? You just point it up at the sky, and rather than wondering what that mysterious shape or thing is, it tells you. And people really, I think, appreciate that. You don't have to pull out that little piece of paper and try and, your planescope and try and line it with the sky. It's been a great technology innovation to get people to engage the night sky.
Right.
Yeah.
That's two. What's number three?
I knew you were going to ask that. And I'll think about it.
Well,
yeah, I had three, but
I'll say this. One of the other things that has changed is that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You remember what it was?
I know what it was. And this will lead into something you had mentioned before. Was the night skies were probably a bit darker in 1974 or so when you started. And so just the general topic of light pollution and astronomy and dark skies and where that may be heading in the future with legions of satellites coming up, etc.
Right. Light pollution is definitely a problem for pretty much all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught a high school astronomy class for seniors at a private school in the Boston area for 6 years. And I would always ask them, how many of you have ever seen the Milky Way? These are pretty well-off kids, private school, used to having, vacations out in wonderful places, and very few had. And so it's one of those things that they don't know yet what they're missing, because they've never had the opportunity. And also, I should mention, this drills down into disadvantaged populations everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
In America, families that live in the cores of cities where the light pollution is worst have the least opportunity often to get away to someplace dark,
right,
to see a beautiful night sky. And that's a challenge for all of us to try to expand that universality of a beautiful dark night sky to everyone. But it's certainly true that light pollution has taken away a lot from us. Ironically, the electronic imaging capability that we have today has kind of given us has leapfrogged over the light pollution. You can use a digital camera to take pictures of the night sky that show you far more than your eyes can show you in 20 seconds. Mm-hmm. And because our eyes don't see really color at night, it shows you, the camera records the color of the Orion Nebula or the bands of Jupiter or whatever it might be. One of the things I was mentioning in my high school class, when I started at Sky and Telescope, we did our first surveys. A large chunk of the people who came to us as newbies, as new, eager amateur astronomers, were young people. They're high school students or college students or young adults. Mm-hmm. And that has changed dramatically. You go to any amateur astronomy club, and there are hundreds of them across the United States. It's all aging baby boomers, and
Yep.
usually sadly, gray-haired white men. And there are very few young people in particular. Now, there is, Frankie, I know you teach, there's a growing, I see more and more astronomy classes being taught at the high school level.
Yeah.
The stats are a little bit dated now. We need to update them, but something like 250,000 students in the United States take an introductory astronomy course
Yep.
in college every year.
Yep.
And so it isn't that they're not getting exposed to astronomy. It's just that they've got so many other things going on. I mean, the whole notion of hobbies to a millennial is a weird concept. And so what we find is that the people who are coming to Sky and Telescope and coming to amateur astronomy because they're genuinely interested in wanting to get involved are sort of 40 somethings. These are adults who have remembered how much they enjoyed astronomy when they were kids.
Right.
And lots of young kids do get interested in astronomy. It just doesn't stick somehow. They're older now. Their kids are like on their own or in college. They have enough disposable income, and here we get back to the inequities thing again, but they have enough disposable income to drop $500 or $1,000 on a nice telescope and maybe a camera to take some pictures. And so the newcomers to amateur astronomy tend to be more middle-aged now.
Yeah.
And there is more gender parity than there used to be. A lot of times we'll get husband and wife couples, but we still have a long way to go in that department.
Still got ways to go there. Yeah. Yep. Good. Thanks.
Oh, that's great.
You are a fascinating chat, I have to say. You have just a wellspring.
I leave you speechless. Well,
I know what my third one was. Another third one I had is you talked about light pollution in the cities, and I believe Sky and Telescope has a column on urban stargazing.
Yes. And there are tricks you can use. Light pollution, like politics, tends to be local. And so if you can get away from your immediate sources of bad lighting, be it street lights, or for heaven's sakes, turn off your porch light and your security light, this is good advice for like when you're trying to see a meteor shower, for example. I mentioned a local public ballpark or a soccer field, something like that.
They're not lit.
Then you have a chance to see better than you would with the lighting at home that you've got at home. And so that's the best bet for getting away from local light pollution. Obviously, if you can, and this applies to amateur astronomy clubs too, they're looking for a dark sky location far away from city lights. But that requires travel, and I'm not as willing to spend all night without sleep so I can watch NovaCast 2021 as I used to be. I'll still make the effort, but by and large, I stick pretty close to home.
Right. Very cool. Kelly, thank you so much. It's been fascinating chatting with you. In fact, I could easily see doing another one with you.
Well, anytime. One of the things that has always characterized me is that I'm very passionate about this.
You are.
I care a lot about astronomy at the professional level, at the beginner level. Nothing gives me more joy. Like at the community star party, I bring little tiny telescopes that are only 1.5 or 2 feet tall. And I set up in one corner and I let all the 6-7-year-olds come over and see the moon. Right. And the parents, like, they'll grab it and, jerk it. And the parents will be aghast, but it's some bulletproof little telescope. I've done it so many times. And so I'll work with that kid and I'll say, okay, help me find the moon again. And they'll look through the finder and they'll see it. And then they look through the eyepiece and they see it again. And I said, congratulations, you're an amateur astronomer. I am a proselytizer for amateur and professional astronomy. till the day I die. I'm sure of it, Frank.
Awesome. That is awesome. And that's a good place to end. Thank you,
All right.
Kelly. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you on the next one.